Chapter 1. The Gathering at Skull Pass. The wind howled through the jagged crags of Skull Pass like the wailing of forsaken souls, a shriek that never ceased, biting deeper than any blade. Snow drifted in thick, blinding sheets, stained gray with the ash of long-forgotten pyres. The land here was scarred and hollowed, a gaping wound at the edge of the world, where the northern lights flickered like dying flames behind black, tattered clouds. Nothing grew in Skull Pass. No bird dared to fly overhead. The stones themselves bled when struck. It was a place of omens, and tonight it would become a place of gathering. The first to arrive came howling. He was enormous, draped in the pelts of flayed wolves, his exposed skin raw with ritual cuts that steamed in the cold. Frost clung to his beard, crusted with old blood. His eyes, wild, feral, shone with murderous ecstasy as he stomped into the mouth of the pass. His axe was chipped and jagged, thick with dried sinew. He raised it high, and from his throat erupted a roar that echoed like a storm breaking against the mountains. "I am Gorthak's Skull Reaper, son of the bleeding sky," he bellowed into the wind. "I come with skulls for the Skull Throne." Behind him, the wind stirred, and more came. A shadow moved across the ridge above, and a cloaked figure stepped out from behind a spire of bone-like stone. He descended slowly, carefully, as though feeling every tremor of the earth. Armor once resplendent with heraldry clung to his frame, rusted and caked in gore. A shattered sigil of a sun, once golden, was slashed across his breastplate, a mockery of forgotten oaths. He bore a longsword crusted in blackened blood, and his gauntleted hands trembled with restraint. Sir Cale the Butcher had arrived. Then came the twins, naked but for belts of scalp strings and smeared ash. They moved with unnatural grace, limbs swaying like dancers, eyes glassy with devotion. One bore a hooked glaive, the other carried a sack that twitched, occasionally emitting a muffled cry. The contents of the sack would feed their tale later. In the distance, war horns howled. A thunderous clatter announced the arrival of Grulgar the Chain Maw. His massive ogre bulk rolled like a boulder through the pass, each footstep cracking the icy ground. Chains wrapped his gut like armor, each link adorned with the teeth and knuckle bones of fallen foes. His lower jaw was not his own. It had been torn off in battle and replaced with a rusted, toothed muzzle bolted into his face. Through it, his breath came wheezing and foul. Across his back was slung a flail made from a horse's spine, weighted with rocks and skulls. The beast laughed as he approached, a wet, gurgling chuckle that caused lesser men to soil themselves. One by one they came, drawn by visions, by whispers from blood-soaked altars and battlefield corpses. From the haunted south came the one they called the Black Sear, a hooded wretch who reeked of sorcery and filth, his body covered in inked runes that pulsed like maggots beneath skin. His presence earned snarls and spit from others. Sorcery was despised, yet tolerated when it served bloodshed. He carried a tome bound in skin and a staff carved from the femur of a priest. From the east, riding a horse that bled from its hooves, came a woman clad in leathers stitched from scalps. Her eyes were like frozen lakes, unfathomable and void. She bore no name, only the title, the Flayed Mask. Her blade was black and curved, etched with glyphs that twitched like worms. Around her neck hung a necklace of tongue, and they gathered around the great fire pit at the heart of the pass. Though no one had lit a flame, the pit burned red with unnatural heat. The fire devoured the snow and hissed against the bones piled high around it. A great stone altar jutted from the ground behind the fire, cracked and carved with the eightfold star, its center filled with a pool of blood that never froze. As the final light faded from the sky, the mountain's silence was broken by the clang of metal. A figure stepped forward from the shadows, towering, silent, cloaked in the remnants of 100 battle standards. Where his face should have been was only a helm of skull iron, featureless but for a slit that oozed darkness. He carried no weapon. He needed none. This was Murak the Herald, voice of the Spire. He raised one fist, the fire blazed higher. You come not for glory, you come not for wealth, you come for blood. His voice was a grinding, thunderous rasp, as though two mountains had spoken. You have seen the visions, you have heard the call, the Crimson Spire rises, the skull throne thirsts, only those who walk the blood road may drink from Khorne's chalice. Around the fire, the gathered warriors knelt, some with reverence, others with violence burning in their eyes. Each one hungered. Each one was prepared to offer not only their enemies' skulls, but the very essence of their being, their stories, their lives, their pain, their slaughter. "A skull is not enough," Murak growled. "One wound is not enough. To reach the Crimson Spire, you must bring your tales. You must bring the songs of your blades. You must speak your slaughter into being. For Khorne hears all, and only the truest devotion shall ascend." A silence followed, heavy and thick. Then Gorthak rose. He dragged his axe across the stone, the metal shrieking. "I will carve my tale in your flesh if you doubt it," he said, smiling wide. So began the ritual. So began the march. Beneath the ruinous stars and the blood-drenched auroras, the warband of Khorne gathered and began to walk the blood road. Each step forward meant a deeper descent into madness, memory, and murder, and the past behind them echoed with the whispered beginnings of their tales. Chapter 2. The Warband of Wrath. They called themselves many things, sons of wrath, daughters of slaughter, reapers of skulls, but names meant little in the northern wastes. In the eyes of their god, only blood mattered. Only the weight of one's skull offerings measured worth. And so, as the red fires of Skull Pass smoldered into the icy wind, the warband gathered in a circle of silent tension. Their breath steamed like smoke from forged bellows, each of them an embodiment of fury given flesh. Gorthak's Skull Reaper stood tallest. His presence was the weight of a falling tower. He bore no armor, only the gnarled pelts of beasts he had strangled with his own hands and the tattered remains of human skins he used to wrap his axe shaft. That axe, Skullrinker, was a monstrous thing. Not forged, but grown from the skull of a chaos champion. Bound in obsidian steel and cursed to thirst forever for blood, his hair was matted with gore, his eyes like lanterns glowing with unrelenting hate. He had killed his kin, eaten his chieftain's heart, and smeared his own face with the ashes of his mother. There was no past for Gorthok, only forward, only death. Next to him stood Sir Kale the Butcher, once a knight of Bretonnia, now a fallen echo of chivalry. His armor still bore the lion sigil of his lost house, but it was barely visible beneath dried blood, claw marks, and the flayed skin of a Grail priest stretched across his shield. Where once he rode in jousts beneath banners of silk, he now walked alone, dragging his notched blade behind him, its tip scraping stone. His eyes had grown sunken beneath his rusted helm, his voice little more than a whisper torn from a wind-scoured grave. He did not speak of his disgrace, but the way his blade trembled in anticipation whenever he saw a man of honor told his story better than words. A lean, sharp-edged figure sat cross-legged at the edge of the fire. Velatrix the Forsaken, once a priestess of Slaanesh, now a creature of rage untempered by pleasure. Her once pale flesh was marred by self-inflicted carvings, a webwork of crisscrossing scars that bled anew every morning in ritual. Her armor was adorned with broken mirrors, symbols of her rejection of her past god's vanity. She carried no blade. Her arms were wrapped in gauntlets ending in hooked talons, each fingertip a needle of cruel iron. Her smile was carved rather than born, lips cut at the corners, always bleeding, always grinning. She had walked away from the Prince of Pleasure on a road paved with flayed faces, and now she sought absolution in gore. Not far from her, swaying like a drunkard, was the Wailing Axe, or so they named it, for it could no longer speak. Its flesh was stretched and distorted, muscles too thick for its frame, its eyes rolled back in ecstasy and torment. Once, a chaos warrior, it had invited a daemon into its soul, a lesser manifestation of Khorne itself, and it had never been the same since. The creature emitted a low, wet keening from its throat, a sound like a child's scream drowned in blood. Its axe arm was fused with its weapon, flesh and iron melded into a single gory limb. It fought like an animal, never speaking, never thinking, just killing. And the others tolerated it. For now, a low snarl drew eyes toward the tree line, where Vrashak One-Horn, a monstrous beastman doombull, gnawed on the leg bone of a fresh kill. His horns curved like blackened scythes, his body a ruin of old scars and fresh wounds, some still twitching from embedded steel. Blood dripped constantly from his maw, even when he wasn't feeding. He wore no armor, only chains, trophies from knights he'd strangled. He followed Khorne with the loyalty of a beast to a flame, drawn, doomed, worshipful. He spoke little, but when he did, it was always with threat. His kind were barely tolerated, but Vrashak had earned his place by tearing the spine from a rival warband leader and cracking it over his knee. Then there was Inquisitor Adrich Falcon, or what was left of him, a former witch hunter of the Empire, now unholy in both words and deed. His once white pride coat was stained red, his silver aquila melted and reshaped into the mark of Khorne, its wings broken and inverted. He carried a pistol carved from an elf's skull, and a saber engraved with the names of every witch he'd burned. Falcon had sought purity once, but the deeper he hunted evil, the more he found himself seduced by it. Now he believed only Khorne's wrath could cleanse the world, and his faith was as fanatical as it was horrifying. The Skullborn twins, Dara and Vrek, stood always side by side, rarely blinking, never apart. They were unnerving, thin, pale, dressed in garments sewn from stitched faces. They spoke in unison, whispering like lovers in the dark. Their weapons, twin sickles, serrated and blood-caked, moved as extensions of one another. Rumor had it they'd been born during a massacre, suckled on blood instead of milk, and given to a warband as tribute. They had never known childhood, only slaughter. Their bond was unnatural, psychic perhaps, but no one dared pry. Their kills were theatrical, choreographed like twisted ballets of butchery. And finally, from the shadows behind them, came Mulgren the Silent. He was impossible to look at directly for long. His skin shifted in unnatural patterns beneath his armor, as though hundreds of insects crawled just beneath the surface. His face was gone, replaced by a smooth, rune-marked mask with no mouth or eyes. Chains hung from his wrists and ankles, not as restraints, but as trophies, each one a binding broken in ritual combat. It was said he had once been a slave in a demon-forged realm, and had broken free by devouring his captors alive. He never spoke. He never slept, but he always moved with the scent of death lingering around him. Together they were the Warband of Wrath, a blight upon the north, an omen of ruin. They did not trust one another, nor did they need to. Trust was weakness. Betrayal was expected. Only the unbreakable bond of shared purpose held them together, to reach the Crimson Spire, and to lay their stories at Khorne's feet, spoken not with words, but with blood. That night, around the screaming fire, each warrior sat in silence, no songs, no prayers, only the howl of wind, the distant crack of frozen bones underfoot, and the unrelenting weight of eyes, hungry, hateful, eternal, watching from the shadows of the beyond. Tomorrow, the march would begin. Tonight, the warriors dreamed of war. Chapter 3. Tale of the Skull Reaver. The fire cracked in the heart of Skull Pass, casting long shadows that danced like spirits on the blood-stained stone. Above, the heavens split with red lightning, as if the gods themselves leaned closer to listen. Around the flame sat the Warband, silent save for the wind, and the occasional grind of a weapon being sharpened on bone. Gorthic's Skullreaper stood, his breath misted in the cold, his scarred chest bare despite the biting wind. The firelight shimmered over the dried gore crusted across his skin. His eyes burned not with hatred, no, something deeper, more sacred. Devotion. Rage baptized into religion. "I was not born a reaper," he growled, voice like gravel grinding in a butcher's trough. "I was born soft, meek, a child of the scaling tribe." No one spoke. No one interrupted. Blood tales were sacred. We were raiders, cowards. We preyed on weakened coastal towns, never fought true warriors. My father, Chieftain Groll, feared too much, spoke of balance, of honor. Gorthak spat into the fire, the saliva dark with old blood. He preached the will of the old ways, worship of beasts and wind. He refused the call of Khorne. Gorthic's fingers tightened on the haft of his axe. But I heard a hymn. In my dreams, in my bones. I was 13 when the blood god first whispered to me. He showed me a throne made of skulls, my people's skulls. He stepped from the firelight, dragging his axe along the frozen stone. The shriek of metal echoed through the pass. I told them, warned them, begged them to kneel, to worship the only true God. They laughed. My father beat me and cast me into the ice pits for blasphemy. He turned, eyes gleaming. I emerged 7 days later, half frozen, starving, eyes ruined with frost, but the voice was louder now. Khorne gave me strength, fury, purpose. The Warband watched, unmoving, as Gorthak raised a hand and with one slow, reverent motion unwrapped a bundle of fur from his back. Within was a crude circlet, jagged and stitched from sinew and bone. A child's skull sat at its crown. My sister. She was the first, Gorthak said, almost softly. She brought me food while I starved. She showed me kindness. That was her sin. He placed the circlet on his head like a king donning his crown. I came down from the mountains with axe in hand. I was 14. I killed her in her sleep. Then I set the longhouses alight. When the smoke rose, they came, unarmed, afraid. He grinned. I split my mother from throat to navel. My brothers, my cousins, I hacked them limb from limb, let the ravens strip their bones while I worked. And my father? He paused, eyes distant with memory. I didn't kill him quickly. The Warband shifted uneasily. I took his legs first, tore them from the hip with my bare hands. I made him watch as I flayed our warriors. Then I built my throne, each skull cleaned in boiling blood. I sat upon it naked, bathed in crimson, while my father died, screaming at my feet. Lightning cracked above them. Thunder answered with a roar. When the sun rose, the village was gone. Smoke, charred bone, blood soaking the snow. Only I remained, alone. Ascended. Gorthak raised his axe, the blood-caked blade catching the firelight. Named me Skull Reaper that day, not with words, but with the howl of wind and the tremor in my soul. I felt the gaze of Khorne upon me, felt his approval. I had done what others feared. I had killed, not for coin, not for vengeance, but for devotion. The fire roared, suddenly higher, redder. Khorne cares not from whence the blood flows, only that it flows. He turned to the others, voice rising. I gave him my bloodline, my history, my weakness, and in return, he made me stronger than death. Silence followed, heavy, sacred. Then, slowly, Gurthak sat, his tale complete. The Warband bowed their heads, not in reverence to Gurthak, but to the god who had heard and remembered. In the shadows, something stirred. A wind, not cold, but hot, stinking of brass and iron. It passed through the camp like a whisper, and Gurthak smiled. The Skull Throne was listening. Chapter 4. Tale of the Iron Redeemer. The wind had died by the time Sir Kale rose from his seat near the fire. The silence that followed was not peace, it was suffocation, thick and expectant, as though the very land held its breath. The flames licked upward, casting long, flickering shadows across the scorched stones, dancing over Kale's armor like ghostly fingers trying to grasp at something long since lost. His helm was still upon his head, as always. None had seen his face since the first night he joined the Warband. It was said that beneath that dented, blood-streaked metal lay either a man utterly shattered by shame or a creature no longer fit to wear a human visage. Either way, the result was the same. Silence, until now. He stood tall, despite the weight of his past. His voice, when it came, was deep and slow. Measured. Cold as the tomb. I was once Sir Kale of House d'Artois, Knight of the Realm, Templar of the Lady, Bearer of the Sunblade, the Lion of Baston. The Warband watched him with cautious respect. He did not speak often, but when he did, his words carved like swords. I was everything a boy might dream of being: polished armor, fine steed, a name sung by minstrels and whispered by lovers. He paused, as if mourning something already long dead. But behind the glint of honor, behind the litanies and prayers, I was hollow, a shell fed by duty and empty faith. The fire cracked. We marched against the North Raiders that summer, a full host of knights, 70 strong, banners high, hearts pure. The foe we faced wore brass and screamed for blood, but we were the righteous. Or so we believed. He stepped forward, the ground crunching beneath his sabatons. The light caught the edge of his sword. It was a bastard blade now, pitted and dark, its once gleaming edge nicked from countless battles. They came not with strategy nor fear. They charged like demons, their eyes wild, their limbs painted with the blood of kin. We fought like men, they fought like beasts. His fingers curled into fists. Home by one, my brothers fell, shattered under axes, torn apart by chain flails. The battlefield was a slaughterhouse. I watched Sir Roland, who once taught me to read, have his jaw torn off by a howling berserker. I saw my squire impaled upon a spear taller than a man, and the whole time I held my blade, paralyzed. His voice broke slightly, steel cracking beneath the weight of guilt. When the final charge came, I fled. My honor, my vows, my courage, all left me. I abandoned the line, left them to die screaming. I hid in the corpses of the fallen, smeared myself in their blood like a child hiding from wolves. He lifted his blade and placed it before him like a grave scout. It was there, half buried beneath the dead, that I saw him. The fire dimmed, the shadows thickened. Not with eyes, but in my soul, a presence. A voice, low and terrible, whispering into my bones, Khorne. He did not scorn me, he did not judge. He offered. He stepped around the fire, pacing slowly. Not redemption through penance, but power. Not forgiveness through prayer, but purpose. And I accepted. The Warband remained silent, reverent. Even the demons curled at the edge of the fire, watching like wolves. listening to the Pack Alpha. When I rose from that pit of corpses, I took the helm of Sir Gerard, melted it, forged it into this. He tapped the dark helm upon his head, so I would never forget what I had become. I returned to Beastson, not as their hero, but as their ruin. He now spoke with venom, with fury, had walked into the chapel of the lady and cleaved the priest in half from collar to groin. I nailed his severed head to the altar. The holy water I fouled with blood drawn from virgins. He raised a gauntleted hand, stained still with brown-red crust. I burned the orphanage first. The screams of children too pure to live echoed through the square. The nobles tried to resist. I butchered them on the steps of the keep, stripped their sons naked, and flayed them before their mothers. His voice was flat, almost bored, as though he recited facts, not crimes. They called me mad, a traitor. But I was neither. I was redeemed. He planted his sword in the ground. Blood hissed from its edge as it sank into the frozen earth, feeding the soil. I do not kill for vengeance. I kill for balance. For every shining helm, I offer a shattered one. For every noble heart, I bring a broken blade. I am the Iron Redeemer. He stepped back, eyes locked on the fire. I purify this world one noble scream at a time. The wind picked up again, howling down from the mountains like a dirge. In the fire, the flames twisted into the shape of a skull, screaming silently into the dark. And above it all, Sir Kale stood unmoving, an iron monolith in the storm, neither knight nor monster, but something far more dangerous. A man with nothing left to lose but blood. Chapter 5. Tale of the Beastson. The fire guttered low, vomiting sparks into the night like dying stars. The howling wind stirred the blood-streaked banners hung from the surrounding crags, but none of the warband moved. The last tale had left a silence behind it, cold, heavy, reverent. Into that silence came the stench of rot. Vrashak Onehorn rose slowly from his haunches, his vast, muscled form unfurling like some ancient predator disturbed from slumber. His horns curled like blackened tree roots, his skin a mottle of thick hide and seared brands that pulsed with ritual markings. From his hunched back hung fetishes of bone, teeth, and tangled hair, trophies of the old ways, each one humming with foul sorcery. But it was his eyes that unsettled even the most hardened killers around the fire. They were not mad. No, worse. They were intelligent. He stepped into the firelight, hooves cracking the frozen earth beneath him, and unrolled a gory pelt at his feet. A human's flayed skin, still etched with its own tattoos. On it he placed a bundle of twigs bound with sinew, a shrunken skull dangling from the cords, twitching as if something within still stirred. He spoke not in greeting, but in declaration. My name was Vrashak, then Beastson, now Sear, taker of the fields of flesh. His voice was not guttural as one might expect. It was raspy, high, unnerving, like wind through a carcass. We had wandered long, my bray herd, my kin. Hungry, hunted, men of Sigmar had driven us from the forest, torched our groves, slain our whelps. His fingers clutched the skull to his chest, and it trembled in his grip. But we followed the call, a red star burning in the east, a voice from the gullet of the world. Khorne. He whispered to me in the bile-soaked dreams of my fevered sleep. He showed me a town, a holy place of men, a wellspring of innocence. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming in the firelight. A place ripe for harvest. He raised his clawed hand and sliced it down the middle with a jagged shard of bone, letting blood spatter onto the fire. The flames leapt higher. We came in the night, cloaked in mist, and the scent of wet fur and blood. We watched them. Farmers' children, milk-faced wives, clinging to their false god, their candles and bells. He spat. They had a priest, fat and pink, with skin like veal. He preached peace, promised protection. We tore out his tongue and fed it to the spawn before dawn. The fire crackled louder now, drawn to the energy of the tale. At the high sun I stood before their gates, alone, cloaked in skins, flanked by the shadows of my kin. I raised the totem of horns and hung a child's corpse from it like a banner. Rashak's mouth split into a grin. They came to parley, a blacksmith, a soldier, a mother. I offered them peace, a lie. They stepped closer. He mined it, then, with a sudden snap, twisted his clawed hands in a mockery of a broken neck. 3 broken gifts for Khorne. Now he paced, heavy hooves thudding in rhythm to his story. I blew the horn of filth. My kin surged from the woods like flies from a corpse. Bray horns screamed. Ungors leapt the walls. Gores clambered through thatch and slit throats in beds. He flung blood from his hand into the fire, and for a heartbeat it flashed red. They fought, poorly. Their guards were peasants in steel. We split them like fruit, gored their pigs, set fire to their homes while they still clutched babes in their arms. Rashak's voice became a chant now, rising in cadence. I split the heads of children and painted walls with their brain matter. We filled the wells with guts. We nailed their holy books to the backs of their own flayed priests. He held up a shrunken, blackened organ in one hand, a heart, perhaps human, perhaps not, and squeezed it. When the sun fell again, there were no screams left. Only chewing, slurping, the groan of dying walls collapsing. His tongue snaked out and licked blood from his wrist, slow and ritualistic. And then I fell. He sat again, the firelight flickering across his teeth as he grinned wide. I tore their chief's liver with my teeth. I danced on the corpses. I built a new altar from their bones. We sowed their fields with flesh and entrails. The wheat would never grow again, but the maggots, oh, the maggots, came like priests. The skull at his side twitched. I was no longer just a shaman, no longer just Vrshak. I became Beastson, voice of the Gorewind, chosen of the Skullfather. His voice dropped low, and he leaned closer. Even now, the earth there will not heal. The trees twist, the soil bleeds, the dead crawl with no direction, calling out for a god who abandoned them. The warband was still, entranced, horrified, awed. I gave my herd the feast of gods. I turned their fields to butchers' troughs, their temple to a whelping den. And when Khorne looked down, Vrashak raised both clawed arms, roared with approval. A gust of wind blew through the pass, thick with the scent of old iron and decay. Somewhere, deep beyond the fire, a beast wailed. And Vrashak grinned. Khorne does not only love war, he loves transformation. When innocence turns to filth, when fields turn to gore, when prey becomes predator. He lifted the flayed skin he sat upon and wrapped it once more around his totem. This was only my beginning. And then the Beastson returned to his crouch, claws dripping with memory. The fire hissed, the mountain groaned. The gods were listening. Chapter 6. Tale of the Flayed Mask. The fire in Skull Pass spat sparks into the black night, casting flickers of blood orange across the ring of savage warriors. It had already heard tales steeped in horror, whole villages sundered, kin turned to gore. But now the flames seemed to lean inward, eager, hungry. She rose with a slow, deliberate grace, like a blade unsheathing itself. Bellatrix the Flayed mask. Her lithe form shimmered beneath leather armor made from stretched skin, human, elven, something older. Bones and razors laced her limbs. Her face, if she still had one, lay forever hidden behind a mask carved from a single strip of flayed flesh, pulled taut and dyed crimson by blood. Its eye-holes were sewn with black thread, and yet she saw through them, felt through them, breathed through them. When she spoke, her voice came softly, a hiss slithering across cold stone. I was born in chains, in Nagaroth. Her fingers brushed across her bare midriff, where ritual cuts shimmered like runes in the firelight. I was not noble-born, no daughter of a great house. I was bred, like cattle, beneath the arena in Khorne, where the dark towers drip with the blood of the weak. The arenas are ancient, vast, and always hungry. She began to circle the fire, each step light, precise, predatory. The pit of screaming silk, that was my cage, my temple, my womb. She laughed then, low and bitter. The crowds numbered in the thousands. Nobles watched from gilded thrones as flesh met steel. Every day I was thrust into the pit, against orcs, men, beasts, witches, shades, daemons. I was 14 when I first killed. I slit a black arc corsair's throat and wore his face for the rest of the week. The crowd cheered. Her hands moved as she spoke, sharp, elegant, like knives carving memories into the air. They thought pain broke you. They thought humiliation made you a servant. But I thrived in the agony. She stopped walking, standing behind one of the younger members of the Warband, trailing a clawed fingertip across his neck. He flinched, but did not move. The lesson was understood. I began to kill with artistry. I did not just end lives. I composed them. I made music from screams, sculptures from bones. They called me Bellatrix, the Lady of Wounds. The crowd adored me. She raised her arms as if basking in phantom applause, her voice laced with venomous pride. But I was never free, always the caged serpent, biting at its bars. Her voice dropped, turning dark. Then came the day of the blood moon, a great festival. They unleashed everything, beasts of chaos, drug trolls, slaves by the hundred, even a lesser demon bound in soul chains. A spectacle for the ages. Her laugh returned, sharp and jagged. I was thrown into the center, no armor, just my blades, and a promise whispered in my sleep. She looked upward, as if recalling a divine dream. Khorne came to me the night before, in the rusted bars of my cell, in the blood that pooled from my wounds. He told me, "Kill them all. Break the chains. Let the pits drown in red." She lowered her arms, her voice trembling with ecstasy. And I obeyed. Her eyes gleamed beneath the mask. I opened a man from groin to gullet, and used his intestines to choke the troll. I drove a broken glaive through a witch's spine and forced her body to dance for the nobles. I tore a demon's eye out and bit through it. The warband stirred, some in amusement, others in awe. But that was not enough. She crouched, drawing a dagger from her hip, its edge stained permanently black. I climbed the walls, killed the guards with their own spiked whips, found the nobles, watched them squeal like pigs as I nailed their tongues to the iron railing. I ripped their fine robes and sewed them into nooses. Her voice became a snarl. The truth, they begged. Oh, they begged. Promised me gold, titles, freedom. But I wanted none of it. Only screams, only fire. She held the dagger to her mask now, gently stroking its edge. I lit the pits with stolen fire oil. The blood ran like rivers down the stairways. I danced naked in the flame as they burned alive, nobles and slaves alike. The fire at the center of Skull Pass flared as if reacting to her tale. When the towers fell, I walked out with nothing but a blade, my mask and the skin of the High Overseer stretched across my chest. Her voice turned reverent now, filled with something close to awe. That night, in the ash and bone, I carved Khorne's mark into my thighs and offered him the arena. All its pain, all its joy, all its death. She placed the dagger back in its sheath. I kill now, not for coin, not for vengeance, but because murder is art. Each life ended is a stroke on the canvas of eternity, and Khorne is the only god who appreciates my masterpiece. She sat once more, slowly, ceremoniously, the fire casting her mask into a flickering grimace. No one clapped, no one cheered, but they knew, all of them. The flayed mask had not just killed for survival, she had thrived in slaughter, danced in flame, sculpted chaos from flesh, and the gods had smiled. Chapter 7, Tale of the Crimson Hound. The fire had died down to a low smolder, casting long flickering shadows that danced like carrion birds circling a fresh corpse. The silence in the camp was taut, held in reverence, or perhaps fear. A storm brewed on the horizon, black thunderheads pulsing like veins in the sky, but here, in Skull Pass, something far more dangerous prepared to speak. He rose without a sound, his back hunched, movements jerky, unnatural. Thick with muscle, but lean as a starving beast, he was clad in crude mail and hides that twitched as if they were still alive. Bones clattered from his belt, ribs, teeth, a jaw still blood-wet. A long crimson cloak hung from his shoulders, torn and crusted with what was unmistakably human skin. The flayed emblem of the Rakesguard visible even now. His name was Virok, but few called him that. Most knew him only as the Crimson Hound. He crouched by the fire on all fours, sniffing the air with a twitching nose. His lips pulled back from yellowed teeth in something not quite a smile. "I was born a mongrel," he rasped, his voice guttural, broken, as if chewed and spat back out. "A bastard of the Norskan coast. My mother said wolves followed my crib, said I howled before I cried. She said I was cursed. I say I was chosen." He licked his lips, tongue black and long. "I was barely a man when the blood god first found me. I had torn my brother's throat out in a squabble over meat, didn't use a blade, just my teeth. I remember the warmth, the taste. I remember how he screamed. Khorne heard that scream." The flames snapped, casting light on his face, scarred, twitching, mottled with patches of fur that sprouted and receded like breath on glass. "They cast me out, called me beast, monster. I lived with wolves, ate raw flesh, ran through snow, on all fours. I forgot my name, my tongue. But the rage never left." He began to pace around the fire, each step erratic, too fast, too fluid. His fingers flexed as he moved, nails blackened and thick, more claw than hand. It was years before I returned. Not as man, not as beast, something between. His head jerked sideways in a violent spasm, then calmed. "I led a pack, not wolves, men. Skin-changers like me, blessed by the Lord of Skulls with the gift of the Maw. We did not fight like soldiers. We hunted." His voice rose now, heavy with anticipation. "We came to the fortress of Drakkenthal on the first night of winter, a bastion of the Empire, stone walls, cannon turrets, Rakesguard banners, and a general, one of the Emperor's own blood. General Marcus von Hellborg. Victor." He spat into the fire. It hissed. They laughed when they saw us, a rabble, bare-chested madmen at the gate. His eyes glinted, feverish. But they did not hear the growling beneath the snow. He crouched again, baring his teeth. We dug under the walls, clawed through frozen earth with bleeding fingers. While they feasted in their halls, we slithered through their cellars like worms. One by one, we killed the guards, silent, efficient, tore out their throats, replaced their tongues with wolf teeth. He snarled, low and deep. When dawn broke, we opened the gates from the inside. The full pack surged in, skin splitting, bones cracking as we changed. Our flesh tore apart and re-knit into fur and fang. We became hounds of war, not men. The howling echoed through the fortress like thunder. He slashed the air with one clawed hand. We hunted through the stone corridors, tore limbs from sockets, shattered breastplates, pounced on fleeing scribes and ripped their spines through their mouths. He turned suddenly, facing the warband. They tried to fight, tried to hold the courtyard. Crossbows, halberds, rakesguard knights with polished steel. His lip curled. We drowned them in their own guts. He raised his hands to the firelight. Even now the fingers twitched unnaturally, tendons rippling beneath the skin as if fighting to change again. And then I found him, General von Hellborg, hiding in the chapel, clutching his hammer, praying to Sigmar. Barak began to laugh, a hideous barking sound that echoed off the rocks. I dragged him to the altar, tied him down with the entrails of his priest. I flayed him slowly, inch by inch, his skin peeled like fruit. I made a cloak of him while he still breathed. He tugged at the red hide on his back, proudly. This is his legacy? The fire surged violently, a gust of wind whipping through the pass as if some unseen beast had stirred. I ripped out his heart and fed it to my pack. His blood was holy, they said, a martyr's blood. It made us howl for days. His voice dropped to a whisper. I left their fortress in ruins, stone-cracked, dead frozen where they fell. The wolves came after, following our scent. They feasted. He sat then, slowly, panting slightly as if the memory itself had stirred the transformation within. Khorne made me what I am, a beast that remembers being a man, and every time I taste blood, I remember less. The fire settled. Varric closed his eyes and tilted his head, listening. Somewhere beyond the camp, far into the darkness, a howl echoed across the mountains. Not human, not wolf, something in between. Varric smiled. The beast was always listening. Chapter 8. Tale of the Black Sear. The fire in Skull Pass burned low now, its light casting blood-soaked shadows that twisted like serpents across the jagged stone. The warband had grown restless. The last tale had left them stirred, some eager, some uneasy. But when the next figure approached the fire, silence returned with a tension that was almost hostile. He moved with no sound, his black cloak dragging behind him like a funeral shroud. His body was gaunt beneath it, emaciated but pulsing with unnatural vitality. His face was hidden behind a mask of black iron, its surface etched with constantly shifting symbols that shimmered like oil on water. Where his eyes should have been were twin hollows, seething with a dim red glow, like coals buried deep in ash. He carried no weapon, only a gnarled staff of bone, crowned with a bundle of withered tongues, still twitching faintly. They called him the Black Sear, though his true name was lost, burned away in one of the dozen ritual fires he had lit to purge it from memory. When he spoke, it was not with a voice, but with something colder, crawling into the mind like smoke. "You wonder," he rasped, though his lips did not move, "why I am permitted to walk beside you. I feel it in your thoughts, your contempt, your suspicion." The warband didn't deny it. Many had nearly killed him on the road. Only Khorne's clear tolerance had spared his life, a tolerance they all resented. You call me sorcerer. The word itself was almost spat, like bile. You say the blood god abhors the arcane, that he takes no pleasure in flame and spell. He raised his hand. Runes lit up his fingers, glowing with the blue fire of raw chaos. The warband tensed, hands went to hilts. But I do not serve Zeech, I do not weave illusions, I do not conjure lies. His voice deepened, sharp now. I see. He paused. I see his will. I see the rivers of blood before they are spilled. I see the skulls that have not yet been taken. I see the prophecies. Khorne will not speak aloud. He struck his staff into the ground. It echoed like a thunderclap. Let me tell you of the night I burned the tower of screaming glass. Even the wind seemed to quiet at that. It stood high in the wastes, a jagged monolith of prism stone and bound demon glass, built by the Arcanum Coil, a conclave of seers, prophets, warlocks, and whisperers of the architect of fate. He spat again. This time, real spittle hit the ground, steaming where it landed. To spawn, cowards draped in silk, speaking riddles while the world bled. He clenched his staff, the tongues writhing with renewed life. They sought me out, thinking me kin, one of their kind. They called me brother. They offered me a place at their table of lies. I accepted. The warband leaned closer. Even those who hated him now listened. I walked through their mirrored halls, where reflections whispered your past, and the air itself was thick with arcane breath. Their leader, Arch-Seer Vel Jaren, was a thing of robes and laughter, never touched the ground, always floating, always smiling. He told me I was born to herald the coming of the Flux Age, that I would be his knife, his key. He stepped into the firelight, and now they saw the black brand on his chest, Khorne's mark, burned into his flesh, not with flame, but by vision. Ascension. He was right. I was a key, but not for Tzeentch. He lifted his hands. I sealed their fate in the dreams of their familiars. I whispered poison into their tomes. I etched damnation into the foundations of their tower. For 7 days, I consumed nothing but ash and warlock blood. I chanted rites that tore the tongues from the demons guarding their gates. I called upon Khorne not for spells, but for judgment. His fingers crackled with restrained energy. On the 7th night, the sky tore open. Not with magic, with fury. Red lightning struck their tower and turned their glass halls into shards. Mirrors screamed as they shattered. I stood in the central chamber, surrounded by 13 sorcerers, each one more powerful than me, each one cloaked in the war. He paused, and I laughed. The fire surged violently. Sparks erupted upward like ascending souls. They summoned horrors, beasts of 1,000 eyes, wings that bled screams. One spat flame that burned without heat, another unstitched reality itself. He spread his arms, eyes flaring, and I tore out their throats with my teeth. His voice rose, no longer calm, no longer cold. I smashed their runes with my bare hands. I broke Vel Jaren's spine. Over the altar they built in Tzeentch's name. I forced him to watch as I gutted his apprentices and fed their hearts into his eyes. His final spell I crushed between my palms and used it to ignite his body from the inside. He stepped back into shadow, his voice a whisper once more. When even dawn rose, the tower of screaming glass was gone. All that remained was dust, ash, and the echoes of slaughter. He lowered his staff. Khorne does not love spells, but he loves slaughterers. And that night, I gave him 13 souls that would have never bled without me. Silence again. Then the Black Seer bowed his head. I do not chant, I do not summon, I do not weave, I see. And what I see now, brothers, is rivers, oceans, worlds of blood. He turned without another word and vanished back into the dark, his staff tapping softly on the stone. No one followed. No one dared. Chapter 9. Tale of the Wailing Axe. The wind tore through Skull Pass like a blade made of frost and spite, setting the bones strung across the ridge to clattering like 1,000 chattering teeth. The fire pulsed, not from the cold, but from the presence that now rose from among them, a hunched figure, grotesquely malformed, its flesh bulging and rippling like a bag filled with serpents. It made no sound. It couldn't. They called it the Wailing Axe, not because it spoke, but because the weapon fused into its flesh did. A monstrous great axe of black iron and barbed bronze, its haft grafted to its forearm by ropes of sinew, its head lodged into the meat of its shoulder like a second mouth, one that howled, cried, whimpered and screamed, not with steel, but with the voice of something long since damned. The axe wailed now, softly, longingly. The creature knelt by the fire, shaking, steaming with unnatural heat, and did not move again. But another voice rose to fill the silence. Bellatrix the Flayed mask stood from her perch, her leather robes crackling with dried gore. She glided forward and circled the silent monster like a spider admiring her kill. Ah, the Wailing Axe, she purred, caressing the air around it, careful never to touch. Poor thing, poor beautiful thing. The others said nothing, watching, listening. Bellatrix was the only one who spoke of it, the only one who could. "That was once a man," she began, tracing a claw through the ash around the fire. "A chaos warrior from the ice coasts of Hellspire. They named him Karvek the Howling because, when he fought, he laughed. He laughed so loud it drowned out the screams." She leaned forward. "Not for glory, not for honor, not even for Khorne. No," Karvik laughed, "because he believed he had conquered death." She paced now, eyes gleaming behind the leather mask. "He carved his name into the skulls of those he killed, kept them in sacks, hundreds of them. Villagers, knights, priests, children, entire towns drowned beneath the storm of his axe. He drank their blood, bathed in it, slept in it." She paused and pointed a blood-stained finger toward the mute thing hunched at the fire. But it was the village of Hadronskeld where everything changed. Her voice dropped, reverent now. A peaceful place, cultless, faithless. No gods, no warriors, just families. Karvek came with 20 of his kin and burned it to the ground. He didn't just kill them, he obliterated them, ripped infants apart and used their limbs to paint sigils on the grass, boiled women in their own birthing tubs, skinned the elder council alive and made them dance before the flame. She inhaled deeply, as if savoring the memory like incense. But that night, Karvek wanted more, not just slaughter, transcendence. He believed, Khorne watched him, that the blood god was perched on the edge of the firmament, waiting for an offering worthy of apotheosis. She turned, voice rising with ecstasy. Though Karvek took the entire village, 300 souls, and drained them dry, not a drop spilled to waste. He poured the blood into the village square, made a lake of it. He waded into it naked, holding his axe to the heavens, roaring his name. Her claws curled as she spoke. Something hurt him, but it wasn't Khorne. The warband leaned in now. The fire pulsed again, the air thick with the scent of scorched iron. "A demon," she whispered. "Lesser, vile, broken. A thing cast from the realm of chaos, desperate to return. It entered him through the blood, rushed into his body like flame into dry timber. And Karvek, he welcomed it, opened his mind, his soul, his flesh. She gestured at the creature beside the fire, still trembling, still steaming. And this thing is what remained. Velatrix crouched beside the Wailing Axe, her fingers hovering near the fused weapon jutting from its meat. Hanel cannot speak now. The demon silenced his voice. It speaks for him, wailing when it is hungry, when it remembers, when it dreams. The axe shrieked suddenly, sharp and high, like a woman being gutted. It lasted 3 seconds, then fell silent once more. Bellatrix smiled. It has devoured his thoughts, his name, but not his rage. That remains. He stood slowly. I watched him kill a warband once. His own. 50 warriors, all dead in a storm of steel and screams. He wept as he cut them down, and the axe sang. Not with joy, not with sorrow, with hunger. She turned to the others. Khorne did not smite him, did not shun him, because the demon does not cast spells or summon storms. It only kills, through him, with him. The Wailing Axe jerked suddenly, head twitching, muscles spasming beneath its skin. The fire hissed. They say if you listen closely in the night, she whispered, you can hear the voices of Hadrinskeld inside the axe, every scream it ever took, still echoing. She reached down and gently patted the demon host on its twitching shoulder. This is what happens when you offer too much, when you pour out your soul with the blood. Sometimes something drinks it. The Wailing Axe raised its head at last. Its face was not human, not daemon. Just a mask of torment, stretched and shifting, mouth agape in a scream it could never voice. Its eyes burned, red, hollow, eternal, and the axe wailed once more, a dirge for the forgotten, a lullaby for the damned. Chapter 10. Tale of the Hollow Fang. The fire in Skull Pass had burned low, reduced to smoldering coals that glowed like the last remnants of a dying star. The Warband had settled into uneasy silence, their bodies still but their eyes alert, watching the shadows beyond the ring of stone and bone. The night had grown colder, heavier, as if the mountain itself held its breath. That was when the wind changed. A foul gust slithered through the camp, not howling but whispering, like wind through crypt stones. The fire flared despite the absence of fuel, casting a pale red light across the ring of warriors. Frost formed on the stones, the scent of iron grew thick. And then he stepped into the firelight. Valdric, the Hollow Fang, tall, elegant, armored in black plate chased with crimson veins that pulsed faintly beneath the metal like living arteries. His skin was pale as moonlight on bone, and his eyes burned not with the gentle glow of the undead, but with the furious golden inferno of devotion. His fangs were visible even when his mouth was closed, too long to hide and too sharp to mistake. He carried no shield, no sigils of his bloodline, only a monstrous sword, a cruel thing forged in the shape of a jawbone, with teeth set along its edge. It stank of old blood and fresh death. He did not sit. He merely stood at the edge of the fire, like a monument carved from wrath. I was born into night, he began, his voice smooth, sharp, a blade sheathed in velvet. A scion of the Lamian line, trained in the courts of ancient blood, fed on silk and song. I was told I was superior, that I was to rule from shadows, not battlefields. He turned his head slowly, taking in the killers around him. They taught me to feed discreetly, to drink only enough, to manipulate, to poison, to whisper. His eyes narrowed. But blood does not whisper, blood screams. His voice grew low, and the fire seemed to flicker in fear. I tasted it first on a battlefield near the Sea of Claws. A minor engagement, an Empire border force against a roving Norse band. I was sent to observe. A political maneuver. He paused, and then something snapped. He raised one gauntleted hand and clenched it into a fist. The scent of blood, fresh, arterial, hit me like a thunderclap. I felt it throb in my skull. I felt it sing. And I ran. Into the fray. Not hidden, not cloaked, naked. Screaming. He stepped closer to the fire. I tore through men like parchment. I split skulls with my fists, ripped jaws from their hinges, lapped at the gush of opened arteries like a starving dog. I bathed in it, drowned in it, and when it ended, I stood alone, surrounded by piles of twitching meat. He looked upward as if recalling a divine epiphany. That was the first time I heard him. He tapped his temple. A voice, deep, thunderous, pure, not the simpering gods of undeath, not the coiling whispers of Magash or the schemes of Manfred, a god of fury, of dominion, of blood earned, not stolen. He extended his arms. Khorne, the name was a knife in the cold night. I returned to my masters, drenched in blood and revelation. I told them the truth, that our purpose was not to manipulate, not to hide, that we were not meant to wither in tombs or weep behind veils. We were predators. We were warriors. His expression twisted into a fang-bearing snarl. They called me insane, cursed. They sent hunters after me, deathless dogs wrapped in the chains of cowardice. I fed them their own hearts. He drew his blade then, slowly, reverently. The jawbone sword snarled as it moved, whispering secrets in a dead tongue. This blade was once the skull of my sire. I split her in half and forged it in the fire of a burning mausoleum. Her blood still feeds its edge. He brought the blade to his lips and kissed its teeth. I took to the north, to the wastes, and there, among the warbands and monsters, I thrived. I killed not for sustenance, but for honor, for domination, for the glory of battle. His voice now thundered with fanatical intensity. I do not drink blood because I must. I drink it because it was earned, torn from the chest of something that dared stand against me. He paced now, slow and predatory. I have slaughtered demons with my bare hands. I have gutted vampire lords and turned their courts into feeding pits. I drank the blood of a bloodthirster once, boiling, screaming, divine, and for 3 days I burned. He paused beside the fire, eyes flaring. Khorne does not shun me for my thirst. He honors it. Because I do not drain the weak. I do not feed in the dark. I feed in the fire of war, with blade, with fang, with fury. He raised his sword high. I am not a thrall. I am not a shade. I am Voldrik the Hollowfang, and my hunger is not for souls. My hunger is for dominion, for conquest, for eternal war. The fire surged violently, bursting upward in a column of red flame, and when it died down again, Voldrik was gone, vanished into the dark like a shadow carved from murder. But the scent of blood lingered in the air, and somewhere beyond the cliffs something howled. Chapter 11. Tale of the Fallen Crow. The fire burned low once more, its embers glowing like the eyes of the damned, tired, red, and always watching. The wind hissed along the stone paths of Skull Pass, curling through ancient bones and whispering forgotten prayers. He stepped forward when no one else would. cloaked in a tattered coat of black leather, its hem singed and stained with so much blood it had turned the color of dried rust. The left pauldron bore the scorched symbol of the twin-tailed comet, half melted and beaten nearly flat. His hat, broad-brimmed, iconic, was gone. His face was worn, sharp, lined with years of hard choices and cruel truths. A single eye glared from beneath the shadow of a burned hood. The other was long gone, replaced with a brass inlay and a cracked lens that whirred as it focused. This was Erdrich Falcon, once a name that brought fear to cults and sorcerers across the Rakeland. Now, he was known only as the Fallen Crow. He did not draw attention with screams or theatrics. He simply crouched beside the fire, rolled a bone between his fingers, and spoke with the dry rasp of a man who had seen too much and remembered every second. I was born in Altdorf, son of a cobbler. I could recite the Templar's oath before I could read. I joined the Order of the Silver Hammer at 15. By 20, I was burning witches and hunting necromancers across the Empire. He tilted his head, and the brass lens in his skull clicked faintly. I was good, very good. I could sniff heresy like a dog smells meat. I dragged a daemon host from beneath a Sigmarite orphanage once. Found a changeling cult in the Rake's god itself. I strangled a blood priest with my rosary beads. They called me Hammerhand. The Crow. Falcon the Unflinching. He tossed the bone into the fire. It cracked and hissed. But there was one name they feared above all. One that kept surfacing. Whispers. Footnotes. Warnings scratched into cell walls in dried blood. Tartharos. Even the wind seemed to pull back from the fire at that name. I thought it was a demon. A spirit. A lie. Until I found it. His voice dropped lower. In Middenland, beneath a ruined chapel, I found a door made of flayed skin and teeth. My companions, they called it heresy, begged me to report back. I shot one in the spine when he turned to run. He smiled faintly, without warmth. Only cowards walk away from truth. He leaned closer to the flames, and the lens in his eye began to glow faintly red. I opened the door. Inside was not a creature, not a demon, a mirror, but not of silver or glass, of thought. I saw myself, what I was, what I could be. I saw that all my years of killing witches, burning heretics, torturing confessions from the desperate, none of it mattered. His lip curled. The rot is in the bone. The faith is rotting. We hunted the few while the wolves danced in noble courts. We burned the sick while the lords drank with chaos in secret. He reached into his coat and pulled something out. A small blackened book, bound in what looked like tattooed flesh. Their old suit. I stopped hunting witches. I started listening to them, learning, watching. I found that Tartharos was no daemon. It was revelation, a concept, a truth. His voice turned reverent, trembling with a strange, wild passion. Khorne does not ask for lies, for veils, for excuses. He asks for blood, for honesty. He does not hide his nature behind sermons and pageantry. He is what he is: fury, vengeance, judgment. He clenched the book tightly. I returned to Altdorf, found my old mentor, the one who taught me to shoot, to torture. I split his head with a hatchet during morning prayer. I boiled his eyes and fed them to his choir boys. I turned the cathedral into a shrine to war and smeared the altar with the entrails of 3 noble families. The lens in his eye glowed hotter now. I branded myself with the mark of Khorne here. He tore open his coat to reveal the bloody rune burned deep into his chest, surrounded by the remains of former sigils of Sigmar, now defiled and crossed out. And then I left, but not before turning in one final heretic. He grinned. A cruel, joyless thing. Myself. He sat back, cracking his neck. I know the Empire still sends men to hunt me. Good men, men like I once was. They find me sometimes. I let them draw blades. I let them speak their rights, and then I cut them down and whisper, "You were right." He pulled his coat tight once more. I am the sword turned in the hand, the flame that consumes the pyre. I have seen the truth of judgment, and it is not merciful. It is red. The fire shuddered, flared, then settled. The wind returned, but it carried no prayers, only silence. Chapter 11. Tale of the Fallen Crow. The fire burned low once more, its embers glowing like the eyes of the damned, tired, red, and always watching. The wind hissed along the stone paths of Skull Pass, curling through ancient bones and whispering forgotten prayers. He stepped forward when no one else would, cloaked in a tattered coat of black leather, its hem singed and stained with so much blood it had turned the color of dried rust. The left pauldron bore the scorched symbol of the twin-tailed comet, half melted and beaten nearly flat. His hat, broad-brimmed, iconic, was gone. His face was worn, sharp, lined with years of hard choices and cruel truths. A single eye glared from beneath the shadow of a burned hood. The other was long gone, replaced with a brass inlay and a cracked lens that whirred as it focused. This was Erdrich Falcon, once a name that brought fear to cults and sorcerers across the Rakeland. Now, he was known only as the Fallen Crow. He did not draw attention with screams or theatrics. He simply crouched beside the fire, rolled a bone between his fingers, and spoke with the dry rasp of a man who had seen too much and remembered every second. I was born in Altdorf, son of a cobbler. I could recite the Templar's oath before I could read. I joined the Order of the Silver Hammer at 15. By 20 I was burning witches and hunting necromancers across the Empire. He tilted his head and the brass lens in his skull clicked faintly. I was good, very good. I could sniff heresy like a dog smells meat. I dragged a daemon host from beneath a Sigmarite orphanage once. Found a changeling cult in the Rake's god itself. I strangled a blood priest with my rosary beads. They called me Hammerhand. The Crow. Falcon the Unflinching. He tossed the bone into the fire. It cracked and hissed. But there was one name they feared above all. One that kept surfacing. Whispers. Footnotes. Warnings scratched into cell walls in dried blood. Tartharos. Even the wind seemed to pull back from the fire at that name. I thought it was a demon. A spirit. A lie. Until I found it. His voice dropped lower. In Middenland, beneath a ruined chapel, I found a door made of flayed skin and teeth. My companions, they called it heresy, begged me to report back. I shot one in the spine when he turned to run. He smiled faintly, without warmth. Only cowards walk away from truth. He leaned closer to the flames, and the lens in his eye began to glow faintly red. I opened the door. Inside was not a creature, not a demon, a mirror, but not of silver or glass, of thought. I saw myself, what I was, what I could be. I saw that all my years of killing witches, burning heretics, torturing confessions from the desperate, none of it mattered. His lip curled. The rot is in the bone. The faith is rotting. We hunted the few while the wolves danced in noble courts. We burned the sick while the lords drank with chaos in secret. He reached into his coat and pulled something out. a small blackened book, bound in what looked like tattooed flesh. Their old suit. I stopped hunting witches. I started listening to them, learning, watching. I found that Tartharos was no daemon. It was revelation, a concept, a truth. His voice turned reverent, trembling with a strange, wild passion. Khorne does not ask for lies, for veils, for excuses. He asks for blood, for honesty. He does not hide his nature behind sermons and pageantry. He is what he is: fury, vengeance, judgment. He clenched the book tightly. I returned to Altdorf, found my old mentor, the one who taught me to shoot, to torture. I split his head with a hatchet during morning prayer. I boiled his eyes and fed them to his choir boys. I turned the cathedral into a shrine to war and smeared the altar with the entrails of 3 noble families. The lens in his eye glowed hotter now. I branded myself with the mark of Khorne here. He tore open his coat to reveal the bloody rune burned deep into his chest, surrounded by the remains of former sigils of Sigmar, now defiled and crossed out. And then I left, but not before turning in one final heretic. He grinned. A cruel, joyless thing. Myself. He sat back, cracking his neck. I know the Empire still sends men to hunt me. Good men, men like I once was. They find me sometimes. I let them draw blades. I let them speak their rights, and then I cut them down and whisper, "You were right." He pulled his coat tight once more. I am the sword turned in the hand, the flame that consumes the pyre. I have seen the truth of judgment, and it is not merciful. It is red. The fire shuddered, flared, then settled. The wind returned, but it carried no prayers, only silence. Chapter 12. Tale of the Skullborn Twins. The night deepened in Skull Pass, pressing down upon the fire like the weight of a closing tomb. The red glow danced on the granite walls, as if the mountain itself pulsed with some buried heartbeat. The warriors around the flame stirred uneasily as 2 figures rose in perfect unison, neither speaking, neither blinking. They were small by Warband standards, lean, sinewy, wrapped in cloaks made of scalps and stitched together sinews, the dried hair trailing behind them like tattered banners. Their faces were painted in spirals of crimson, slashed across pale flesh like a child's attempt at a war god's mask. Identical from head to toe, identical in their eyes, pale, rimmed with blood and brimming with a singular, unshakable purpose. Dara and Vrek, the Skullborn twins. They stepped toward the fire, feet bare, bleeding lightly from old cuts left unhealed as ritual. As they approached, bent sideways, licking toward them, drawn as if by hunger. They spoke at once, twin voices, flat and cold, perfectly synchronized. We were born beneath a sky of knives. Our first breath was drawn in the midst of slaughter. Our mother died upon the altar as we crawled from her womb. Our father cut the cord with a bronze cleaver. Then he held us up, dripping, screaming, and offered us to Khorne. They paused, their heads tilting inward together like mirrored marionettes. We were accepted. They circled the fire now, slowly, hands trailing through the smoke as if weaving it into their tail. We were raised by the blood price of the Grulhaus tribe, Northmen who gave up their names, their tongues, their very thoughts, to live as vassals for rage. They fed us wolf milk mixed with blood. We were taught to crawl before we could walk, to kill before we could speak. Earth. Dara held up a jagged blade, no longer than a child's arm. Its edge was blackened, its hilt made from finger bones wrapped in sinew. This was our first knife. We earned it when we were 3. Vrek smiled, just slightly. They gave us a task. They threw a bag at our feet. Inside were 2 puppies, brothers, like us. They said we could only keep one. They both leaned forward, eyes glimmering in the firelight. We ate the other. There was no pride in their tone, no remorse, only memory. By 6, we had killed our first man, a captured marauder from a rival tribe. They tied him to a pole and gave us each a hook. We took turns carving until he was nothing but a pillar of red. When he stopped screaming, we cut out his heart and roasted it. We fed it to the warhounds. Breck ran his fingers across the bone-studded cord around his neck. The teeth we kept. Their voices dropped, whispering now like twin blades across silk. Our tribe pitted us against each other constantly, not to divide us, but to make us stronger. They made us bleed together, so we would grow together. We learned to fight as one, to kill as one. We developed the bond. Dara stepped forward, removing her mask of braided flesh. Beneath it, her face was painted in a spiral, mirrored perfectly on Vreck's own. When one of us closes our eyes, the other still sees. When one of us bleeds, the other hungers. Vreck raised his hand and drew his blade across his palm. Dara hissed, licking her lips. They turned to face the fire now. When we turned 10, the blood feast came. Once every 12 years, the Grulhas challenged the other tribes, inviting them to the Crater of Horns, a sacred ground of ritual slaughter. 13 tribes entered. Directly the Grulhas entered, men turned toward them, terrified, and, they both smiled. Only one left. Their eyes gleamed with the echo of ancient carnage. Fool with the offering. Our chieftain said, "Show them the future of Khorne." We stood naked in the center of the crater, blades in hand, surrounded by warriors twice our size, clad in iron and rage. We didn't wait for the signal. Their voices grew louder now, more forceful. We lunged. We tore the throat out of the bone-hide chieftain before he could lift his hammer. We danced through their lines like shadows soaked in fire. We leapt, we rolled, we struck. Always together, always as one. Dara mined a throat slash. Vreck twisted his wrists in a spiral. We gutted the Blackwood twins and used their entrails to bind the hill tribe berserker. We snapped his neck with our knees and bathed in the spray. We lit the gore pit on fire and drove 3 rival champions into it, screaming, flailing, flensed by flame. Their bones cracked like drums. Vreck's eyes flicked toward the sky, and when the sun rose, we stood atop a mountain of the dead. Our tribe kneeled. The others were ash and ruin. The ground was red, soaked so deep the earth drank no more. Dara's voice softened, eerily melodic. We carved the mark of Khorne with the bone of a war chief into our chests. They pulled their tunics aside, identical symbols burned into their sternums, fresh, weeping. Obe, the blood god, looked upon us that day, not as children, not even as warriors, but as embodiments of unity in violence. They turned together, facing the fire once more. Since then we have wandered, we've killed together. We've bled together. We've destroyed 36 champions, 17 cult leaders, 3 demons, 1 minotaur, and a fortress. We are 2, but we are 1. Their heads tilted back in perfect synchronization. We are Dara and Vreck, the Skullborn twins, the slaughtered pair, the eyes of one blade. They stepped back, rejoining the circle, their tail offered, their bond unbroken. The fire hissed, the mountain growled, and far in the distance, drums began to beat in rhythm. 2 hearts, 1 rhythm, endless death. Chapter 13, Tale of the Blackened Pyre. The fire in Skull Pass burned tall now, higher than it had all night. Its flames licked the frozen air like tongues of molten hate, casting grotesque shadows that stretched like gallows ropes across the jagged stones. The warband sat in silence, their blood-soaked bodies shrouded in steam and frost, eyes fixed on the figure who now stepped into the circle. He moved with the slow, deliberate gait of a hangman who had never once missed the drop. Zazarek Grimhewer, the Blackened Pyre. A chaos dwarf of short stature but immense presence. His armor was a walking furnace, thick black iron etched with blasphemous runes that glowed faintly with internal fire. Smoke drifted from the slats in his helm, and the scent of brimstone clung to him like a second skin. Across his back he carried a two-handed executioner's axe the size of a man, its edge red-hot and pitted from long use. Scrolls hung from his belt, some polished, some charred, one still faintly twitching. He stood before the fire and removed his helm with one gloved hand. His face was scorched, burned long ago, a map of melted flesh and blackened beard. One eye had been replaced with a lens of brass and obsidian. The other burned like a coal embedded in a furnace. When he spoke, it was in a voice like cracking stone, slow and rasping, as though forced through ruined lungs. You speak of tribes, of clans, of warbands and pit fights, of children bathed in blood and villages slaughtered in the dark. He lifted the axe from his back and drove it into the stone at his feet. It hissed upon impact. I burned a city. The fire leaned toward him, as if in acknowledgement. Its name was Daskul Var, a mountain hold of the Ashen Circle. My people. My blood. His eye narrowed. They abandoned the old ways. They turned their backs on wrath. They bent their knees to the Lord of Change, to Tzeentch. He spat, and the stone smoked where it landed. Whispers reached me in the deep tunnels. At first I denied it. Impossible, I said. But it was true. They painted their forges with sorcerous glyphs. They twisted demons into tools. They built idols of change and fate. His gauntlet tightened on the haft of his axe. I was their executioner. I served the Council of Chains. I sharpened the blade that ended oaths and settled grudges. When I learned their betrayal, I offered them my final service. He drew a small black icon from within his breastplate, Khorne's rune, forged in iron, still wet with oil and ash. I walked into the council chamber during the festival of Ascension. The city was lit with lanterns. The forges glowed with unnatural fire, and the nobles danced beneath banners woven with lies. He chuckled, a horrible wet sound, severed the High Artificer's head with one blow, rolled it down the steps of the Forge Temple. Then I threw his body into the iron crucible. He paused. They thought it a political act, a power grab, until the screaming started. He stepped away from the fire and pointed toward the heavens. I unsealed the furnace gates. Let the molten iron flow into the streets. Not water, not fire. Iron, boiling, bubbling, screaming like a beast denied meat. It poured from the gutters, flooded the workshops, trapped them in their homes. He mimed the motion of a lever being pulled. I watched from the overlook as the city drowned. Men, women, children, all gilded in death. Flesh hissed, bones cracked, helmets fused to skulls. Daemons clawed free from the sorcerers who once bound them, only to be caught in the tide. The fire flared, casting his face in a hellish glow. But that was not enough. Khorne does not want melted skulls. He reached to his belt and lifted a black rod tipped with a runed spike. I dragged the survivors from the wreckage, those who hadn't burned, those who begged. I chained them in rows and forced them to march into the great crucible, one by one, slow, ritualistic, screaming the names of those they betrayed as the metal consumed them. His voice dropped to a growl. I caught their skulls in baskets of iron, cooled them in blood, polished them with ash. offered them to Khorne with chants drawn from the Book of Flame and Chains. He stepped back to his axe and placed a hand upon its head. For 3 days I kept the furnace burning. I fed it with flesh, hair, scrolls, icons. I poured every Tzeentchian relic into that pit and sealed it with a binding of hate. He looked into the fire. When it was done, I walked alone from the ruins. The mountain still smokes to this day. No bird flies over it. No daemons whisper there. The stone is black, the sky burns red. It is a wound in the world. His voice was almost reverent now. They call it the Pyre city, but I know its true name. He raised his arm and pointed at his branded flesh. It is my offering to the blood god, my redemption, my wrath, my truth. He turned back to the warband and replaced his helm. Let your stories spill blood. I bathed in it. Let your axes fall. Mine never stopped swinging. He pulled his axe from the ground. It hissed again. Then he walked back into the dark, steam rising from his armor like smoke from a dying forge, and the fire in Skull Pass roared with renewed fury. Chapter 14, Tale of the Bile Blade. The fire in Skull Pass spat embers skyward, sputtering with a sickly green flare as the next figure emerged from the gloom. A foul stench preceded him, of rotted meat, wet fungus, and burned incense, and for a moment even the hardened killers of the warband flinched. Flies buzzed around his boots, his armor oozed. He was an abomination, yet he walked with purpose. Durak the Bile Blade, once a warlord in Nurgle's festering legions, now a scarred apostate of decay, wrapped in scorched chain mail and robes of stitched leather torn with both age and violence. Where once his flesh had bulged with corruption and pox gifts, it was now burnt and cauterized, his skin a battlefield of charred scabs, ritual brands, and surgical scars. His right arm, swollen with bloated muscle and lined with cauterized pustule runes, ended in a weapon, a rusted cleaver bolted directly into bone, its edge inscribed with both the bloated fly of Nurgle and the skull rune of Khorne, one crossed out with nails. He dragged a censer behind him, leaking a trail of choking black smoke. It smelled of tar and burnt infection. He did not smile as he approached the fire. His eyes were dull, cold, and hollow, not like a corpse, but like a man who had cut out every part of himself that once begged for comfort. His voice was a dry wheeze, caked in ash and pain. They called me blessed. He stepped closer. Once, long ago, when I walked in the filth, naked beneath the gaze of the grandfather, I was Durgar the Fertile, champion of rot, lord of the pale bloom. First among the molded, I walked with daemons at my side, covered in slime and prophecy. He raised his blade. Its edge smote where the blood of recent victims sizzled still. But filth, lies. He looked down at his own body, expression unreadable. They told me disease was love, that boils were gifts, that each cough, each rot maggot chewing through my chest was grace. I believed them. I smiled as my organs liquefied, laughed as my skin sloughed from my arms. He gestured to the puckered scars on his exposed chest, thick, ropey, black like old leech wounds. I spread the pox across the Aishan marches, wiped out 5 villages with a breath. I watched children melt in their mother's arms and called it blessing. He growled, low and seething. But then came the night of white fire. The warband sat still, listening. We had taken a temple, a shrine to Khorne deep in the blasted steppes. We defiled it, shat in its blood basin, hung nurgling fetishes from its sacred chains, poured pus into the altar. The Plague Father laughed. He sang through our lungs as we mocked the war god. He paused, and then the fire came. His voice sharpened now, cold, cutting. No daemons, no army, just flame. White, silent, like moonlight soaked in rage. It rolled through our camp like a god's breath. It didn't burn the grass, didn't scorch the stones. Only us, only the rot. His hand trembled. I watched my brothers burst into steam. I saw a greater, unclean one writhe in agony, its belly boiling until it burst, spraying plague spores that ignited like oil, screaming, burning, purify. He looked to the stars then, eyes twitching, and I understood. Khorne was not just rage, not just blood. He was purity. Not the false mercy of rot and indulgence, but the cleansing fire, the sacred violence. The only God who demands nothing but truth. He took a blade from his belt, a smaller one, jagged and black, and slowly, methodically carved a line across the bloated fly sigil still faintly visible on his left thigh. He did not wince. I cut it out of myself, inch by inch. The blessings, the tumors, the worms. I screamed, they screamed, but I didn't stop. It took me 6 days to stop weeping pus, 9 more before the stench left my breath. The fire crackled, now tinged with green. Now I burn the infected, the bloated, the weak. I hunt Nurgle's gifts across the wastes and gut them like deer. I use salt and steel, fire and blade. No mercy, no prayers, no infection left alive. He raised the bile blade high. It glowed faintly with a sick red light, oozing black ichor. I offer not disease, but wounds, not plague, but purgation, not rot, but wrath. He knelt, pressing the flat of the blade against the burning coals. He grinned. It screamed. A high warbling wail erupted from the metal itself like 1,000 insects dying at once. I do not seek Khorne's forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I seek only to serve. He stood again, smoke rising from the blade. I am Durak now, no longer Durgor, no longer blessed. I am the cure. He turned away from the fire and walked back into the dark, his censer trailing ash behind him, the black smoke swallowing his form like a shroud. And for a moment, the fire burned a shade brighter, as if Khorne himself had stirred. Chapter 15. Tale of the Chain Maw. The ground trembled as he rose. Massive even by ogre standards, he loomed over the warband like a siege tower of bone and muscle. Slabs of meat twitched beneath layers of scarred hide, and crude iron chains jangled across his body with every step. His armor was an abomination, a patchwork of torn flesh, rusted plate, and jawbones, dozens of them, cracked and splintered, bound together into a brutal gorget that encircled his neck and shoulders. Each was from a different creature. Men, orcs, elves, even a dragonling's maw crudely hammered into a pauldron. At his waist hung the remnants of a flayed standard, once the proud banner of a noble house, now reduced to a blood-soaked rag. They called him Chain Maw. He did not speak often, but when he did, it was like a mountain giving voice. He knelt beside the fire, a massive hand dragging a spiked mace behind him, a brutal thing forged from a wagon wheel rim, wrapped in spiked iron. The weapon still dripped with something that was definitely blood. Steam hissed off it where it touched the coals. Bracker grunted, his words slow and cracked like stone being ground beneath iron boots. Once I was slave. Ha! The warband watched, silent. Captured in Talia. Chained in pit, fed rats, given stick and rock, told to fight. He laughed, a low, grinding sound that rattled the stones beneath them. So I fought. He raised a thick finger and pointed to one of the jawbones on his shoulder, a narrow, well-polished mandible with delicate teeth. First jaw I ever took. Belonged to elf duelist. Fast. Talked too much. Split him in two with wagon axle. Took jaw. Wore it. He tapped it reverently, then moved on. Fought in pits for years. Ate my weight in flesh. Grew strong. Broke chains. Wasn't enough. He turned to the warband, eyes narrowing. I wanted screams, not of crowd, of nobles. He leaned in, his voice deepening. So, I marched west, into Bretonia, found House Bellero, old blood, fancy armor, stinking of perfume and honor. He spat into the fire, it sizzled. They had castle, walls, knights, peasants with torches. Thought they were safe. He grinned, a grotesque sight that stretched the scars across his jaw. They weren't. He lifted his mace and thudded it once into the stone. Dust fell from the cliffs. First night I killed the stables. Horses. Grooms. Left heads on the gate. Another thud. Second night I pulled the guard captain through the latrine, tied his arms to the drawbridge and ripped him in half when they opened it. The warband stirred, a few grimacing in appreciation. Third night, I climbed the tower, tore through the kitchen, cut the cooks in half with the stew pot lid, baked the steward inside his own oven. He paused, then chuckled. Ate him. He reached to his shoulder and lifted another jawbone, this one still stained with charred fat. Fourth night, they begged. Sent the youngest son with parley flag, promised gold, land, cattle. His voice turned low. I ate him too. Left jaw as warning. Another jawbone. Fifth night. The family prayed. Knights gathered in chapel, wore their best armor, lit candles, sang songs to the lady. He reached behind him and drew a sword. No, a piece of a shattered altar, sharpened to a crude edge. I broke the chapel doors with the lady's statue, cut the night mother in half with her own holy blade, spiked the father's head to the altar. He looked around the fire, voice now near reverent. Then I built my armor. He thudded a hand against the bone gorget. Each jaw, taken from noble blood. Each scream, earned. I drank their wines, burned their tapestries, flayed their ancestors' portraits, and fed them to the dogs. He pointed a massive finger toward the fire. Last thing I did, I stuffed the High Lord's jaw with molten silver. He bragged so much, I wanted him to shine forever. He leaned back, tossing a cracked goblet, stolen likely from the same castle, into the flames. Khorne didn't whisper. He didn't send dream. He just watched. And when I was done, I heard the chains fall away. He lifted his arms, the iron links binding his armor clinking like the tolling of execution bells. I am no longer slave, no longer pit fighter. His grin widened. I am Brakgar, the Chain Maw, breaker of thrones, swallower of songs. He stood tall, shadow looming over the entire camp. I do not fight for sport. I do not fight for coin. I fight for dominion, for skulls, for blood that sings. Then he walked back to the edge of the circle, his chains clinking, the bones on his armor rattling like wind chimes in a storm. The fire trembled behind him, and somewhere, far off, a noble line ended. Chapter 16. The chaos wastes beckon. The fire of Skull Pass burned no more. It had died with the last tale, swallowed by the wind and replaced by the march, the final march. The warband of wrath rose as one and descended into the storm-choked north. The time for stories had ended. The blood now had to be spilled. Their path twisted into the outer reaches of the chaos wastes, a cursed, cancerous stretch of the world where the very rules of nature bent and broke like snapped bones under a warhammer's weight. There were no stars here, no sun. The sky churned with constant storms of crimson and black, lightning raking the horizon in jagged, hateful streaks. The ground was a scab, a wet, pulsating flesh field of cracked stone and weeping sores. Trees grew upside down, their roots clawing the sky like broken hands. Rivers bled, mountains moaned in their sleep. Even time grew sick here. The Warband felt it instantly. Even the small things. Blood never dried on their weapons. Flies stopped buzzing and began whispering. Footsteps echoed with the sound of slaughtered prayers. Each mile further twisted the world tighter around them, like a noose of bone and madness. And then it deepened. On the third day, the first fell. A lesser marauder, a fresh whelp taken in weeks ago to carry rations, began to weep. Then scream. He clawed his own eyes out as they marched across a plain of screaming skulls, the earth groaning beneath their feet. He babbled of a throne made of tongues, of rivers that drank him instead. His mouth frothed with black bile. He begged for death. Werthak obliged. They left his body on a pike, and it sang until it finally rotted. By the fifth day, the air itself was blood. Mist rolled in thick waves, veined with red, reeking of copper and excrement. It filled lungs like fog, heavy and wet. The strong trudged forward. The weak vomited until their guts spilled out between their fingers. Dara and Vrek moved like dancers through it, inhaling deeply, their eyes wild with communion. Bellatrix the Flayed Mask spoke only in riddles now, her talons carving visions into her own flesh. Her blood slithered up into the air instead of falling. She claimed she could smell Khorne's breath in the wind. The Wailing Axe never stopped trembling. The twins began speaking to things no one else could see. They giggled as they walked. Even Bracker, the Chain Maw, grew silent. He no longer laughed, no longer crushed bones for the sound. He marched like a butcher who'd seen the end of all meat. The land began to scream. They passed through a canyon of petrified corpses, hundreds of warriors, all frozen mid-roar, their mouths stretched wider than human jaws should allow. The rocks echoed with their agony, though none moved. When one warhound licked the blood from a cracked skull, it imploded. Its innards exploded in reverse, sucked into the void of its own ribs. It didn't even yelp. It simply vanished, inverted into pulp. The black Sear wept crimson tears and spoke in tongues. He had to be restrained for 2 days. On the third, he bit off his own tongue and swallowed it whole. When questioned, he wrote in ash. He speaks now directly. I no longer need mine. By the 7th day, the Crimson Spire appeared. Or did it? They thought they saw it. A jagged spire of bone and brass, rising into the sky like a blade forged from every death ever suffered. It shimmered in and out of view, sometimes on the horizon, sometimes beside them, sometimes reflected in the eyes of those they passed. It throbbed in the distance like a heartbeat that wasn't their own. Baldric the Hollowfang knelt before it and whispered, "He watches." His fangs clicked together. "He waits." And then the visions began. Not dreams, not hallucinations, but decrees. Each member of the Warband began to see. Werthak saw his own body torn apart by thousands of blood letters, his bones polished and stacked, his skull kissed by Khorne himself. He screamed in joy, not fear. Bellatrix saw herself sculpting the faces of dead gods into frescoes made of flesh. She laughed and wept in equal measure. Rakkar heard his chains weeping, each link singing with the voices of slain noblemen begging to die again. Falcon the fallen crow knelt and whispered prayers he hadn't uttered since boyhood, but they were different now, twisted. Right! Broshak the beast tongue howled into the wind, the trees howled back. Each vision different. Each one soaked in murder. And every single one was a promise. The seer's eyes exploded in his skull. He fell to his knees, blood pouring from his sockets. He smiled. "It is time," he croaked, the last words his body would ever utter. The wind changed again. No longer a wind, but a pulse, a hunger. The land demanded blood. The Crimson Spire was near. Not just in space, but in spirit. It loomed not in front of them, but within them. Each warrior felt it. A pull, a hook through their soul, dragging them toward judgment, glory, or annihilation. They pressed on. Only the strong remained. Only the mad. Only the faithful. The chaos wastes had peeled back their flesh, cracked open their minds, and filled the holes with Khorne's whisper. And he was hungry. Chapter 17. Trial by Skullfire. The air had begun to burn. Not with heat, but with presence. The Warband crested a jagged ridge of blood-slicked shale and beheld the valley below, a wound in the world, blackened and raw. A crater of scorched bone and hardened brass opened wide beneath them like the screaming mouth of a dead god. In the center rose an altar of iron fangs, bleeding steam, surrounded by monoliths carved in the image of endless skulls. But they were not alone. The Crimson Fangs waited there. A war host of Khorne, unlike their own, drawn by the same dreams, the same thirst, the same pull toward the Crimson Spire, which now towered just beyond the valley, no longer a vision, but a colossal reality. Its jagged frame pierced the bleeding clouds like a sword through rotted flesh, radiating such hatred that the earth around it cracked and bled. The Crimson Fangs stood in ranks of perfect savagery. Dozens of them. More. Warriors draped in gore-drenched sigils, clad in scaled crimson plate that pulsed with their battle rage. Juggernaut cavalry snarled and stamped, brass-shod hooves cracking obsidian earth. Their banner bore a skull impaled on a horn of brass, bleeding flame. At their center stood Kordak Skullbrand, champion of Khorne, his armor made from fused vertebrae, his axe taller than most men. His eyes burned with divine fury. He spoke no words. Words were nothing here. From the moment the Warband of Wrath saw them, they knew. There would be no alliance, no unity, not even slaughter side by side. Khorne demands sacrifice, and the blood of the unworthy is as valid as that of the enemy. This was trial by Skullfire. Only one warband would stand before the Crimson Spire. Only one would ascend. The warband stared across the valley for mere seconds. Long enough to understand what must happen. Then they charged. The Warband of Wrath hurled themselves downhill with screams of ecstasy and fury, their weapons raised, their bodies already burning from the sheer proximity to the spire. The ground exploded. Vuldrik the Hollowfang blurred into the vanguard, a blur of black and red, his jawbone sword screaming through the air. He cleaved into the enemy front line with vampiric grace, tearing off heads and drinking from spurting necks without slowing. Bracca the Chain Maw let out a bellow that cracked the bones of the very earth. He smashed through a line of axe-wielding cultists with his wheel flail, grinding torsos into pulp, ripping arms from sockets with each spinning strike. A juggernaut galloped toward him. He caught its reins, tore the beast's head off with his bare hands and threw it at its rider, crushing him beneath the collapsing brass corpse. The Skullborn twins moved like a storm, their blades flowing like river water, slicing open groins and throats with each perfect pass. One would faint, the other would kill. They laughed in perfect unison as they disemboweled a war priest who tried to summon a blessing, his entrails used to string their bow as they fired a femur-shafted arrow into the eye of a charging berserker. Velatrix sang as she danced, blades flashing in rhythmic arcs, eviscerating a spear line of crimson-robed zealots. Her masked face turned toward the sky as she waded through their remains, bathing herself in arterial spray, her every movement a step in her murderous ballet. Gorthak's Skullreaper met Kordak's Skullbrand in the heart of the chaos. Their axes crashed like titans clashing in the sky. Steel screamed, sparks flew, the ground cracked beneath their feet. Kordak drove his blade into Gortak's thigh. Gortak headbutted him so hard the champion's nose caved in with a wet crunch. They roared into each other's faces, mouths filled with blood and madness, until Gortak sank his teeth into Kordak's cheek and tore it free, chewing it as he drove his axe through the rival's ribs. But it was not victory. Not yet. The Crimson Fangs countercharged. Rashak the Beastson bellowed an inhuman roar, summoning a wave of bestial chaos from the warped terrain. He leapt into the air, tackling a brass-horned behemoth and slashing its throat open with a shard of obsidian, its gurgling scream echoing as he tore out its heart and bit into it, blood pouring down his furred chest. Jurak the Bile blade moved with unnatural fury, his rusted cleaver glowing with searing red light. Each strike left cauterized ruins where men once stood. He howled Khorne's name with each blow, scouring the battlefield of plague-marked defectors that had slipped into the Fang's ranks. He found them, he purged them. The Wailing Axe surged, possessed by the demon within. It no longer moved like a man, it was a whirlwind of howling steel and meat, arms cracking backwards, mouth locked open in a silent scream. It butchered without rhythm, without art, pure chaos, pure hate. Falcon, the fallen crow, stalked the edges of the battle like a shadow with purpose. He struck not the front lines, but the commanders, the standards, the chain of command. He garroted a commander with barbed wire, set fire to the wounded, and carved unholy litanies into the chests of the dying. The Seer's empty sockets wept black fire. His charred body floated above the battlefield, whispering to the wind. Wherever he hovered, the land cracked and split, consuming foes in localized quakes of blood and brimstone. He was no longer a man, he was a warning. Hours passed, or seconds, or centuries. Time died in the chaos wastes. When the screaming stopped, the world seemed to breathe. Smoke choked the valley, ash covered the corpses. The sky rained teeth, and only the Warband of Wrath stood, battered, blood-drenched, but unbowed. Around them lay the remnants of the Crimson Fangs, mangled, headless, devoured, crushed, or impaled on spears of bone. Skulls had already begun to form a spiral around the altar, pulled by unseen forces, stacking themselves like an offering. The air burned with divine pressure. The Crimson Spire loomed close now, so close they could hear the steel groaning within its walls, so close they could feel Khorne's gaze. Trial complete. Annihilation achieved. Only the worthy remain. Chapter 18. The Ascension of One. The smoke of war still hung in the air like a shroud, thick with the scent of charred meat and molten blood. The ground in the valley of Skullfire was blanketed in corpses, twisted limbs, shattered bone, organs steaming atop broken armor. Blood pooled in the hollows of the land, bubbling gently as if stirred by unseen breaths. The wind that passed through the battlefield was not cold nor hot, but hungry. The Warband of Wrath stood victorious, their enemies reduced to nothing more than offerings for the blood god. But silence bred more than reflection. It bred envy. The Crimson Spire now loomed like a god's tooth driven into the world's skull. It pulsed with malevolence, each throb of power sending tremors through the earth and hearts alike. Lightning carved the skies in patterns too deliberate to be random. Thunder rolled not as sound, but as laughter, deep and wet, like the voice of a butcher god, gorged on conquest. Then it happened. The sky split. A shaft of blood-red light poured down upon the battlefield, engulfing one among them, a column of divine rage, of recognition. Gorthok, Skull Reaper. His arms outstretched, his axe dropped to the ground, his mouth agape in a roar of wordless ecstasy. His flesh flayed open like wet petals, revealing not bone but glowing ruined muscle, throbbing and expanding with every heartbeat. The blood god had seen him, and he had chosen. For a moment, no more than a breath, all knelt. Even Brakar bowed his head. Even Valdric hissed through clenched fangs. Even the black Sear, now a floating husk of ruin, drifted backward in reverence. But awe does not last long among monsters, and envy burns hotter than worship. Bellatrix was the first to rise. "Hie him," she hissed, claws twitching. "My blades have painted altars across empires." Falcon stepped forward, blood dripping from his coat. "I was once holy. I turned churches into pyres. If anyone is worthy, it is I." Rashak bellowed and raised his horns to the sky. "The soil fed on my kin. My bloodline ends with me. I have earned this." Even the twins, once inseparable in their eerie harmony, turned toward each other with hungry eyes. Vrek whispered, "One may rise." Dara finished, "But it need not be him." Gorthak, still engulfed in divine flame, rose above them now, his body changing, flesh stretched taut across new, monstrous bone. Spines erupted from his back, his mouth widened, revealing rows of serrated teeth. His blood boiled into vapor. But the warband did not cheer. They charged. The hunger to ascend overwhelmed every bond, every oath, every scar shared in battle. The warriors who had survived gods, demons, and each other now turned inward, eyes filled with betrayal and divine ambition. Breaker hurled his spike flail toward Gorthak's throat. Bellatrix lunged like a storm of knives, aiming for the exposed belly where the divine marks had begun to carve themselves. Vulcan drew a black powder pistol etched with cornate runes and fired it point blank at Gorthak's chest. The bullet passed through fire, but met only raw, shifting divinity. None of it mattered. Gorthak's body exploded. Not into ruin, but into power. The light flared, blinding. A ring of force burst outward from the epicenter, sending warriors flying into the valley walls. Bones shattered. Armor cracked. Blood erupted from mouths and ears. When the light faded, the battlefield was silent. And Gorthak stood transformed. He was no longer ogre, nor man, nor beast. He was a demon prince of Khorne. 12 feet tall, wreathed in flame, his body armored in plates of living brass and bleeding iron. His axe, reborn, now floated beside him, spinning lazily, trailing blood fire in the air. His eyes were empty, no longer mortal, no longer seeing, only burning. But he spoke. No words, just a growl that made the world itself bend. Bond chooses, you obey. Some did. The Wailing Axe fell prostrate, clawing at the soil, moaning with demon grief. The black Sear, what remained of him, wept steaming tears of ichor. Valdric snarled but knelt, fangs bared in submission. The rest, they fought. Bellatrix lunged again, but Gorthok flicked his fingers, and her entire body split from collarbone to groin in a single wet snap. her insides flayed across the altar as a final offering. Raka swung his flail, but Gurthak caught it mid-air. With a twist, he tore the ogre's arms off at the shoulder, then caved in his skull with a kick that sent his body tumbling hundreds of feet into the blood marsh below. Falcon charged with blade in hand, screaming blasphemies and praises both. Gurthak incinerated him with a gaze, his body crumbling into ash, his bones melting into the ground, his screams echoing for minutes after he was gone. The Skullborn twins struck together, fast as shadow, their blades aimed for the demon's eyes. But there were no eyes to strike. Gurthak impaled them on a single horn, both of them, and held their writhing bodies aloft as their blood flowed in twin streams, painting his armor anew. And then he dropped them. The battlefield fell silent again. Only Vrashak remained standing, snarling, fists clenched, ready to charge. Gurthak did not kill him. He simply stared. Vrashak stared back. And then, slowly, the Beastson bowed. Not out of submission, but recognition. A new warlord had ascended. A demon prince had risen. The Crimson Spire opened its gates. The ground split, and the path to the throne of skulls welcomed its chosen. Behind them, the dead wept. Before them, eternity burned. Chapter 19. The Crimson Spire. They limped, crawled, and bled their way across the battlefield, dragging broken weapons and shattered dreams behind them. What remained of the Warband of Wrath was a ruinous remnant. Of dozens, only a handful survived the trial by Skullfire and the ascension of Gurthak. The rest were meat, sacrifice, glorious offerings, forgotten. The wind that scoured the valley was not wind, it was breath. The breath of Khorne, rasping across the land like the exhalation of a forge. Every step closer to the Crimson Spire was agony. The earth no longer accepted their feet, it recoiled from them, demanding blood for every inch gained. The ground pulsed beneath them, cracked open in places, exposing veins of molten brass that hissed with the tortured voices of the damned. The spire loomed ahead, a towering monolith of skulls, iron and warped bone, rising higher than any mountain, vanishing into a sky split by storms of crimson and black. Its surface was alive, breathing, flexing, bleeding. Faces, half-formed and screaming, emerged from its walls, then vanished again beneath the living structure. It was not made. It had grown, drawn upward by millennia of slaughter, fed by every war, every scream, every head cleaved from a neck in Khorne's name. They reached the base. The gates were made of spines, not bones arranged into a door, spines still twitching, fused together with strands of wet sinew, knotted into a towering arch. Blood rained from above, not drops, gouts, drenching them as they stepped forward. Vrashak the Beastson, Voldrik the hollow Fang, the black Sear, and the twisted remains of the Wailing Axe passed beneath the archway, their eyes wide with awe, dread, or madness. At the head of their line walked Gurthak, no longer mortal, no longer sane. A demon prince, clad in armor forged of soul metal and butchered fate, each step shaking the ground, his wings dragging rivers of gore behind him. The air around him shimmered, distorted by hate and divine presence. The spire accepted him. They parted, and inside a chamber of slaughter. No floors, no walls, only layers upon layers of skulls, suspended in endless space, spinning and shifting like stars in a blood-red void. They hovered in place, held aloft by fury alone. Rivers of blood floated freely, streaming through the skulls like serpents, whispering secrets. Some laughed, some screamed, others begged in dead tongues. In the center, the altar of the first offering. An anvil of bone, tall as a siege tower, chained to nothing, anchored by will alone. The survivors approached. Each bore what they had earned, what they had stolen, what they had become. Vrashak stepped forward first. He held a bundle of writhing cords, his own intestines, torn from his belly and bound with bloodvine. He knelt and placed them upon the altar, speaking in roars. "I give my gut, my rage, and my line. Let no beast follow me but death." Flames erupted from the bone beneath his offering, devouring it. The Bloodvian screamed as it burned. Valdric approached next, dragging the headless corpse of Velatrix, what little remained after her flaying. He laid it down and buried his throat. "I give her ambition, and mine. May my thirst never slake." The altar drank her body and belched a cloud of smoke shaped like fangs. Valdric did not smile. The Black Seer did not walk. He floated. His burned body hovered above the altar, his eyes empty sockets of ruin, bleeding smoke. His mouth no longer moved. His voice echoed from the altar itself. "I offer foresight without mercy. Vision without pity. Let wrath eclipse wisdom." His body imploded, sucked into a pinprick of darkness, vanishing. No scream, only silence. The Wailing Axe shambled forward last, dragging its fused weapon limb behind it. It looked up, jaws slack. The axe screamed in its place. It laid its entire body upon the altar. As it did, the skulls in the void turned to watch. Its chest opened, not cut, not torn, but peeled, revealing the demon that had lived within. A thing of red sinew and black flame. It reached up, trying to claw its way out. Gorthak's fist came down. Once, the demon shattered into steam and bone, and then Gorthak stepped forward. The altar shook. The blood rivers stopped. Even the skulls fell silent. He raised both arms. In one he held the head of Kordak's Skullbrand. In the other, his own former heart, cut from his body, still pulsing, still steaming. He cast them both into the air. The head split open, the heart burst. And then the altar responded. The skulls howled in joy. The rivers surged. The chamber itself opened like a flower blooming in reverse, revealing not a new room, but a void deeper than comprehension. From within it came a presence. Not Khorne, with something of him. A fragment, a sliver, a gaze. It saw Gorthak. It entered him. His body spasmed, twisted, grew. The others collapsed. Their bones cracked. Blood wept from their eyes. Their skin blistered. Not from heat, from truth. And then it stopped. Gorthak stood alone, now twice the size, twice the hate. A monster not of flesh, but symbol. His wings flared. His voice thundered. The spire is fed. He turned. The chamber began to collapse. Not with violence, but with completion. It had been built for this moment, and now it ended. As the survivors fled, screaming, sobbing, or laughing, the spire consumed itself in silence, folding inward into an ever-tightening knot of divine mass. Only the skulls remained, floating, eternal, watching. The ritual was done. Khorne was pleased. Chapter 20. The Skull Throne remembers. The sky wept ash. Across the broken, bleeding horizon of the chaos wastes, the wind howled with voices not born of air, but memory, each gust a chorus of agony, ambition, and blood-choked laughter. The world was scarred now. The valley of the Crimson Spire nothing but a hollowed crater, still steaming with divine wrath. Where once the spire pierced the heavens, now stood only its imprint, a scorched spiral of fused skulls and cracked brass, embedded in the earth like a brand. And from that ruin, one figure walked alone. He cast no shadow. The light fled from him. The blood in the soil curdled in his wake. Gorthak Skullreaper, once man, then beast, then daemon, now walked as something else entirely. His form still bore resemblance to the daemon prince he had become at the spire's heart, but it had changed, evolved. His brass-plated flesh now pulsed with unholy veins, each beat releasing gouts of steam and fury. His wings were no longer leathery appendages, but great, jagged banners of bone and chain, whipping in the storm as though caught in a war without end. His face was a mask of god-marked hatred, the skin peeled back to reveal a constant snarl of molten teeth. His eyes glowed with the blood-embigured radiance of those who had seen the skull throne, not metaphorically, but with clarity. For he had stood before it. Not its full form, such a thing would annihilate the soul in an instant, but a reflection cast through 10,000 sacrifices. He had heard its roar, its silence, its judgment, and he had survived. Behind him stretched a path that would never close. Where his feet fell, the earth cracked and bled anew, each print a wound, each stride a condemnation. Trees tried to grow, withered. Daemons tried to approach, evaporated. The sky shifted above him, forming storm clouds shaped like gaping mouths, whispering his many names. Scourge of the Spire, bearer of blood beyond, the crownless wrath, chosen of no mercy. With every step, memories followed. The laughter of the Skullborn twins, overlapping like blades crossing in the dark. View the howling lament of the Wailing Axe as demon met demon inside its corpse. The bubbling, blistering sermon of Durak the Bile blade, chanting as his flesh peeled away in holy fire. The serpentine voice of Velatrix, last heard in song as she drowned in her own artistry of knives. Falcon's gunfire, Vershak's beast roars, Bracker's rattling chains. All of them gone, consumed, but never forgotten. Their stories had become more than history. They were currency in the vaults of the blood god, and the vault was open. Somewhere in the impossible distance, atop the mountain of screaming bone, beyond the rivers of eternal warfare, the skull throne stirred. Not physically, it did not need to move, but every skull upon it turned, ever so slightly, toward the blood road now paved by Gorthak's march. He was not alone. Behind him phantoms began to gather, shades, echoes. From far-flung corners of the world they came, brute with a bronze jaw dragging a flail of melted bells. The witch-child, her fingers turned to daggers, eyes blind with devotion. The black-armored knight atop a horse made of human torsos. A serpent priest vomiting blood in spirals. A half-eaten wolf wearing the skin of a priest. They came, drawn by the path he cut through the world. Whispers crawled through the air. There is blood to be shed. The spire called once. It will call again. Tell your story. Take your skull. Die screaming. Gorthak did not speak. He did not need to. His steps were language. His presence was certain. The war to come would not be written in scripture or prophecy, but in the screams of the dying and the songs of steel through flesh. The chaos wastes would churn again. The blood god, ever silent, ever hungering, now smiled a toothless, timeless smile. And upon the throne, high above the realms of men and gods, Khorne remembered.